Good afternoon, and welcome to the Easter Seals Project Action Webinar, MAP 21, the new Section 5310 program. All participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during today's presentation. If you should need assistance during the conference, please press star, then 0, and an operator will come back online to assist you. Now I'd like to turn the conference over to Kristen McLaughlin.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Welcome everyone to today's session on MAP 21, the new 5310 program. Before we start the session, I do want to get a few housekeeping items out of the way. We did send some instructions on downloading the PowerPoint out to everyone yesterday. It is available on the Project Action website. I just put the link into your chat section right now. So if you were unable to get that, please feel free to go to the website and put that up. Also, registration for the event today was incredibly high, so we are exploring dates for a second session that will be co-sponsored by the National Center on Senior Transportation. So if you have any colleagues or people that you know might be interested and were unable to get into the session, we will be holding it again soon. We don't have the date yet, but it will be very soon. And at that time, we'll also have the PowerPoint available on the National Center on Senior Transportation's website. So please keep that in mind, and we'll get the information out on that session as soon as we can. We are going to be recording today's session, and it will be transcribed and archived on our website. We try to have that available within the first couple of weeks, but we always say give us at least 30 days just in case there are any technical difficulties. But we will get that up as soon as we can. And if you have any requests for accessible formats, you can always email those to webinars@easterseals.com, and we'll make sure that you get those. We also are hoping, we were having a little technical difficulty with the closed captioning, but we hope that is going to be up very, very soon, if it's not already. To access that box, you would just click Control and F8. And again, that should be up very, very soon. I am very pleased to welcome our speaker for today, Mr. Gilbert Williams from the Federal Transit Administration Office of Program Management. We know that Mr. Williams is very busy and are incredibly thankful that he could join us today to give all of this really great information. As I mentioned, because we had such a high registration, we did decide not to take live questions today. We've compiled a list of questions that we received in advance. After the session, if you do have questions that were left unanswered, we ask that you please do email those to projectaction@easterseals.com, and we'll make sure that your questions are addressed. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to turn the session over to Mr. Williams.
Well, thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here this day to present this information about the new Section 5310 program pursuant to MAP 21. As many of you are aware, there are several changes to the program, and we here at FTA have been providing guidance and general information in order to ensure that folks are aware of all the changes in the programs so that they can submit grants and provide the type of service that is sorely needed out there throughout the country. So the first thing I want to do is just give you a copy of the agenda to let you know the topics that I'm going to be speaking to today. The first one is the purpose of the program. I'll also be talking about funding, specifically apportionments and the availability of those funds, the different types of eligible projects, eligible recipients, and sub-recipients as well. I'll speak a little bit about the role of the designated recipient. This is something that is a lot of interest out there. I've been receiving a lot of telephone calls and email messages back in my office about designated recipients. So I want to cover that as well. Talk about program requirements. I want to talk about mobility management. That has also been a hot topic. So I want to provide some information and some guidance as to mobility management type activities. And then there are other provisions of the program which I'll speak about as well. And then finally, there is a slide that provides technical assistant resources. The transportation technical assistance team that we have here at FTA, and we're right now being hosted by Eastern Seals Project Action, but the National Center for Mobility Management is one of our technical assistance partners, as is the National Center on Senior Transportation. The program purpose. As you can see on this slide, the Enhanced Mobility for Seniors and Persons with Disabilities program, the key word there that I want to point out is the first word, enhanced. The Section 5310 program has been around for several decades. Under Safety Law, it's called Transportation for the Elderly and Persons with Disabilities program. But there are many changes on the program under MAP 21 which have enhanced the program, especially for this targeted population. Next slide. Apportionment and availability of funding. The apportionments are something that Congress set up for the program, and the money is apportioned to areas based on a formula. It is a formula program, and that is that number is based on the number of seniors and individuals with disabilities. And what they do is they take a look at the number of those types of folks in each of the areas, small urbanized areas, rural areas, and throughout the states, and compare that to the specific areas in order to set up the apportionment for those areas. And what that allocation breaks out to is that 60% of the funds go to the designated recipients in areas that have a population of 200,000 or more people. Those are the ones that we call large urbanized areas. 20% of the funds go to the state for their small urbanized areas and for their areas that are under 200,000 persons with disabilities. Then you have that 20% for the rural areas. Those are areas which are less than 50,000. So you have large urbanized areas, small urbanized areas, and the rural areas. MAP 21 provided funding for 2 years, only 2 years. Federal fiscal year FY13 was the first year, and we are rapidly coming to a close of the second year, which is FY14. This slide shows you the apportionments for each of those areas and the national total for those 2 years. As you can see, the funding slightly increased in the second year from approximately $257 million to a little bit over just under 257.5 million for the second year. If you can go back to that slide.
Sure.
Thank you. If you want to see the total breakdown by state, by urbanized areas, there's a link for FTA's web page that shows that total apportionment. All right, next slide. All right, let's talk a little bit about eligible projects. There are 4 categories of eligible projects under this program. The first one are public transportation projects that are planned, designed, and carried out specifically to meet the needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities when public transportation is inappropriate, insufficient, or unavailable. And those 3 things there, those 3 points, insufficient, inappropriate, or unavailable, are important points that I'll be carrying out throughout the presentation. Many of you will recognize that these are the types of projects which have been funded traditionally under the Section 5310 program, and we here at the Federal Transportation Administration call those our traditional Section 5310 projects. They're capital projects. The second eligible type of projects are public transportation projects that exceed the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Some of you may recall these type of projects as projects that were funded under Section 5317, the New Freedom Program. Those are those type of projects. The Section 5317 program was repealed under MAP 21, but those type of projects were folded into the Section 5310 program, so there is still eligibility for those type of projects. The third category are public transportation projects that improve the access of fixed route service and decrease the reliance on paratransit operations. Those are new type of projects that are eligible under this program. And then we also have the fourth and final category, which are alternative transportation projects that assist individuals with disabilities with transportation. As I talked about that first category, the one that we call the traditional Section 5310 type projects, this slide gives you an example of those type of capital projects. So I won't read through them, but as I said, many of you are familiar with those projects because those are the type of projects that have been traditionally funded throughout the years. But the last bullet there you'll also see is mobility management programs. That is an eligible capital project under this program, again, where public transportation is insufficient, inappropriate, or unavailable. The second slide here, these are the types of projects that were funded under the New Freedom Program. Many of you are familiar with those as well. Expansion of paratransit service beyond their required 3/4 mile requirement, extensions beyond their operating hours if they want to increase door-to-door service or door-through-door service, the incremental cost of that type of service, and incremental cost of providing a same-day service, and the acquisition of vehicles and equipment designed to accommodate mobility aids that exceed the dimensions and weight ratings for wheelchairs. This is not an all-inclusive extensive list, but it just gives you an idea of the type of projects that are eligible for funding under this category. The third one are your public transportation projects that improve access to fixed route service and decrease the reliance on complementary paratransit. And I put up there 4 bullets of those type of projects. Again, this gives you an idea of the type of projects that are eligible funding under this category. And the fourth one, that's the final one, the alternatives, the public transportation projects that assist seniors with their transportation needs. One of the things that I put up there were volunteer driver and aid programs because those are becoming very popular. The purchase of vehicles to support accessible taxi, rides, sharing, and van pool programs. And voucher programs as well are eligible type activities under this category. Eligible projects. There's something new under this program, and you will notice that operating expenses are now an eligible project expense under this program, whereas under previous legislation there was only categories for administrative expenses and for capital expenses. So operating expenses is something new, and it's something that people should be taking advantage of. But so far as your capital expenses are concerned, they're different pots of money, if you will, when you look at those. The first one is that at least 55% of your apportionment must be used on capital transportation projects that are planned, designed, and carried out to meet the special needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities, and again, where public transportation is insufficient, inappropriate, or unavailable. I'm going to jump down to that last bullet there and talk about the administrative program expenses, where 10% of your funds can be used for that. And anything that you have left after you've met that 55% requirement, and if you elected to use the 10% for program administration, anything left can be spent for other eligible projects, including capital projects or operating expenses, and the new Freedom type capital projects as well. All right, there are different types of eligible recipients and sub-recipients under this program. You have designated recipients for states that receive grants directly, states for all the urbanized areas and rural areas under 200,000 in population. And this will require new designations for your large urbanized areas. You also have sub-recipients, and what we call the sub-recipients are states or local transportation authorities, private nonprofit organizations, or operators of public transportation that receive the grant through that receive the grant indirectly through a recipient. Now, there are limitations for the traditional 5310 projects, which I talked about earlier, that 55% bucket apportionment that the designated recipients must meet. So let's talk a little bit about these eligible subrecipients. The eligible subrecipients for the traditional 5310 program, the ones that have to meet that 55% category, they are primarily your nonprofit organizations, private nonprofit organizations. That's who the vast majority of the subrecipients will be, and projects funded under their categories. However, there may be instances where a state or a local government authority that is approved by the state to coordinate transportation services can be an eligible subrecipient. And there also can be, although I've never seen this, where the designated recipient can certify that there are no nonprofit organizations in their area to provide the service. So again, we're looking primarily at the private nonprofit organizations as being the subrecipients for the traditional 5310 projects, meeting that 55% requirement. Then you have eligible subrecipients for outside of that 55% requirement. And here you can have a state or a local government authority. Private nonprofit organizations can also fall into this category, and operators of public transportations that receive 5310 funds indirectly through a recipient. Now, the designated recipients. These are public entities that are designated recipients. They're your small urbanized areas and rural areas. This is a state agency has to be the designated recipient for these areas. There's no new designation that needs to be designated letters that need to be submitted to FTA for these types of designated recipients. We'll accept the letters of designation that are on file from previous legislation, since the state agency was the designated recipient for the entire state under previous legislation. But for the large urbanized areas, the governor of the state will have to designate who is going to be the designated recipient. And there are different organizations that can be the designated recipient. And they are, you can have the same designated recipient as there was under the Section 5307, which is the Urbanized Area Formula Program. It can be the designated recipient who was the designated recipient for the New Freedom Program, which was under Safety Lou. It can be a metropolitan planning organization. It can be a state agency or another public agency. There also may be instances where you can have multiple designated recipients for the large urbanized areas. These generally occur for a large urbanized area that encompasses 2 or more states. And if that is the case, if they elect to have multiple designated recipients, they will have to notify FTA of those designated recipients and how they're going to split the apportion of funds for those for those different states in that large urbanized area. Now, the roles of the designated recipient. We're getting a lot of questions about the roles of the designated recipients as people have been contemplating whether or not they want to be the designated recipient or not. So I've started outlining some of the duties and responsibilities of these designated recipients, and I put it on the next couple of slides. But you can also refer to the FTA Circular 9070.1G, which goes into more detail about the role and responsibilities of a designated recipient. So the designated recipient will have to document the state or the designated recipient's procedures in a management plan. And when I talk about the state can be a designated recipient, like I said, and the designated recipient in this category, when I state designated recipient, you should think in terms of the designated recipient for a large urbanized area. So again, they're going to have to document their procedures for administering the program in a management plan. They're going to have to plan for the future for their transportation needs and ensure the integration and coordination among diverse population modes and providers. And you can read the slide further down and without me reading it to you, to give you a flavor for all of the roles and responsibilities that they have. The next slide is a continuation of their roles and responsibilities, making sure that all of their sub-recipients are in compliance with all federal regulations and requirements. And they have to certify that all the projects are included in a coordinated plan. This is different from previous legislation, where previous legislation the projects only had to be derived from the plan. Now they have to be included in the plan. And that plan is a plan that was approved through a process that included participation by seniors and individuals with disabilities, representative of public and private nonprofit transportation and human service providers, and other members of the general public. But the legislation specifically called out that the plan must be a plan that included seniors and individuals with disabilities in the planning and approval of that coordination plan. And I'll talk a little bit about the coordination plan later on today in the presentation. Okay, I mentioned earlier that there are different program requirements, that there has to be a state management plan and there has to be a program management plan for each of the large urbanized areas. There has to be a coordinated plan, that is that locally developed coordinated human service transportation public plan, and there has to be program of projects that are submitted with each of the designated recipients' grant application when they submit that grant application to FTA in our electronic grants making system, currently TEAM. All right, this slide talks a little bit about the documents that are included, the program management plans and the state management plans. So what these management plans do is they have to describe the designated recipient's policies and procedures for administering the program. Each designated recipient is required to have an approved management plan, be it a state management plan or a program management plan, on file with the FTA region office. And they have to update this plan periodically to ensure that it is incorporating any changes that may have come about in the management of their program or any new requirements that are being brought about under MAP 21 or any other guidance which FTA provides. The designated recipient shall provide an opportunity for each of the stakeholders to review the plan after the management plans after they have been developed, and develop the plan or significantly or when the plan is revised. The locally developed coordinated transportation human service plan has to be, as I said, developed with participation by seniors and individuals with disabilities, with the representatives of public and private nonprofit transportation providers and human service transportation providers. And again, these projects must be included and identified in the transportation plan before a grant can be awarded. And all projects to be selected must be consistent with this plan. So we got slides are frozen, I think, in time here, so just bear with us for a minute. Wait a minute. Back up one. There we go. The coordination plan, the requirement elements in the plan. Again, the FTA circular, Chapter 5, gives you detailed information about what's required in the coordination plan and how the plan is developed. And there is guidance in there on how to develop a plan. But most organizations already have some type of plan already in place because it was a requirement under previous legislation. But there is an opportunity for them to have to revise their plan to make sure, as I said, it incorporates changes that were brought about under MAP 21. So you can read through the required elements of the plan. As I said, most organizations already have a locally developed plan. So this shouldn't be something that is new to designated recipients. All right, next one. Other provisions of the plan, other provisions of the program. MAP 21 brought about some significant changes as to how funds, as I said, are apportioned and how funds are used. And this includes transfer provisions of the funds. So funds apportioned for the small urbanized areas and the rural areas serving another area of the state can be transferred, but it will require the governor's certification. Funds apportioned to the small urbanized areas and the rural areas may also be transferred to anywhere in the state, including the large UZA, but this will require a statewide program. You must transfer these funds in accordance with your statewide program. Significant change under MAP 21 is that for the large urbanized areas apportioned funds, they cannot be transferred. All funds apportioned for the large urbanized areas must be used in the large urbanized areas. Under previous legislation, there were transfer provisions for Federal Highway Administration funds to be transferred to the 5310 program. that is still available under the program, but the 55% floor, if you will, that requirement does not apply. So any highway funds that are transferred to the 5310 program, you do not have to meet that floor of having 55% of those capital funds being transferred. Mobility management. As I said, mobility management is eligible as a capital expense, and it can be a capital expense under the 55% bucket apportionment, or it can be a capital expense outside of the 55%. In order for it to meet the 55% requirement, it has to be a capital project, which is being conducted by a private nonprofit organization, or, like I said, where you have a state or local government authority that is approved by the state to coordinate services, or in those rare instances where the governor certifies that there is no nonprofit organizations available to provide this service. So those are your traditional sub-recipients, and that is the sub-recipient requirement for a mobility management activity to be funded under that 55% category. Other provisions of the program is that purchase of services are eligible capital expenses, and we specifically called out private taxi cabs. They can be eligible sub-recipients provided that they provide a shared ride service. And we talk about a shared ride service, that has to be something which is in the taxi cab company's policies and procedures. If the taxi cab company is only providing an exclusive ride service, then they can still be funded, but they will be a contractor to a eligible recipient, a third-party contractor, if you will. Again, as I said in the opening remarks, FDA is partnering with our technical assistance providers, Easter Seals Project Action, and the National Center on Senior Transportation. And I have their website, phone numbers, and points of contact on this slide for your reference as well. And the next slide shows you the other technical assistance provider, the National Center for Mobility Management. And there's their contact information as well. So that concludes the presentation of the webinar this afternoon. I know that we have some questions that people have submitted in advance, and I will start going through these questions and see how far we get as time permits.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was a really great presentation. We do have some questions that we received in advance. What I'll do is I'll read the question and allow Mr. Williams to answer that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you do have questions that remain unanswered after the session, you have a couple of options actually. You can call into the next session, which will be co-sponsored by us and the NCST. The date will be soon. It's just not quite yet confirmed. And so you have that option as well. Or you can email your questions to us at projectaction@easterseals.com. So after we go through these questions, if you still have remaining questions, please feel free to contact us. So we'll start with the first question. In terms of eligible subrecipients, is an entity such as an assisted living facility eligible to receive funds, and this entity only provides transportation to their residents and none outside of their gates? They are also not a part of the regionally coordinated plan. Please elaborate on why or why not.
Okay. First, an assisted living facility can be an eligible subrecipient under this program. But as this activity is described in the question, their activity would not be an eligible activity. The assisted living facility, as I said, can be an eligible subrecipient, but because as they state that they are not part of the regionally coordinated plan, that would disallow the activity for being an eligible activity for funding. FDA has also been trying to get away from silo-type projects, and we've been encouraging people to coordinate projects. So that's something that eligible subrecipients should bear in mind as they develop their project and seek funding for those activities.
Great. The next question, are designated recipients of 5310 funds required to hold public meetings about the program?
The designated recipient, their projects and their program is part of a general planning program which is conducted. It might be with the Metropolitan Planning Office as they are developing their long-range transportation plans and their transportation improvement programs, and all those planning activities are required to have public participation. So there is an opportunity for the program and the public to be made aware of the program throughout those planning activities. As I said, the projects have to be included in this locally developed transportation plan and have to be included in the transportation improvement program, and those programs are vetted through the public. So there is opportunity for the public to be made aware of the designated recipients for planning programs.
All right, the next question. Can a designated recipient use a portion of the 10% administrative funds to acquire a vehicle to be used to oversee the 5310 project and its subrecipients? The vehicle would be used for site visits and meetings associated with the 5310 program and program of projects.
Yes, that would be an eligible activity for the 10% for administrative funds. And while I'm talking about the administrative funds, the 10% portion, one of the carrots, if you will, about that is it is 100% federal funds. So you can purchase a vehicle and use it in the manner in which this question is stated for administering your program.
Great. All right, the next question. How can 5310 funds be used to improve access to existing transportation? Does this include adding automated annunciators to existing buses to make bus stop announcements, or funding for building improvement and sidewalks to make it possible to access bus stops? And would it also include improving intersections for pedestrians, such as adding accessible pedestrian signals or putting in signals where they don't exist?
These type of activities are eligible for funding. They're eligible capital funds. Most of them sound like they were funds under the New Freedom program, so they are eligible for funding under this program. They may fall under the 55% category, provided they meet all of those eligibility tests that I spoke about earlier. Otherwise, they're eligible for funding as other capital projects.
Next question. How is the FTA notified of multiple designated recipients and split apportionments? Who do the letters come from?
The designated recipient for the area has to submit a letter, and that comes from the governor. The governor is the one that selects the designated recipients in the area. So if there are going to be multiple designated recipients for a large urbanized area, again, the governor has to submit a letter to the FDA region office notifying them of the split designation and how the funds are going to be apportioned for each of the areas.
Right, next question. It is my understanding that people with disabilities and older adults must be involved in the transportation planning process. How should this be monitored, and is there any oversight by the planning committee on the projects that are selected?
The Federal Transportation Administration conducts periodic management reviews, and this is a point of review. We are, like you said, trying to ensure that seniors and individuals with disabilities are involved in the planning process throughout, early on, throughout, and the actual approval of the Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan. So it is something that we do look at during our triennial reviews and other state management reviews that we conduct of the designated recipients. And I think there's a second part.
How should it be monitored, and is there oversight by the planning committee on the projects that are selected?
The oversight, as I said, comes from triennial reviews and other management reviews. Planning committee on the projects that are selected. There is no competitive planning selection criteria as there was under previous legislation, but since all of those stakeholders, those 7 stakeholders, which included seniors and individuals with disabilities, were instrumentally involved in the planning process, that the coordination plan would have those type of projects which they have deemed to be a priority for their particular areas, that they can just select those projects from the coordination plan for implementation.
Great. Next question. As a receiver of 5307 funds, are we precluded from 5310 funding?
A 5307 provider can be a sub-recipient, if you will. There's procedures for them. It's outlined in the circular as a sub-recipient. There's a special term that's, I'm just not recalling right now, but they can be recipients of the funds. So I'll have to go back to the circular to find that particular section there to give you the correct terminology for a 5307 or even a 5311 provider. But they can be recipients of the funds, but they can only be they cannot be the designated recipient unless they met that other requirement, the fact that the governor has them as a certified as a coordinator for the Section 5310 funds.
Great. So if you do have follow-up questions on that question, email us projectaction@easterseals.com, and we'll get that additional information out to you. The next question: if we are a 5307, I assume that's 5307 recipient, and we want to be a recipient of 5310, would we apply for 5307 and apply to the state, or apply to the large UZA for the subrecipient designation?
Yeah, that's similar to the question that I answered before there, that is possible. There are procedures for doing that, and it is outlined in the circular.
Very good. Next question: who decides who the large urbanized area designated recipient will be?
The governor actually submits a letter certifying this, but the governor, the MPO is responsible for facilitating this. And the MPO will go through its regular planning procedures using their regular planning funds in order to provide the type of information and submit it to the governor's office, where the governor will make the selection as to who will be the designated recipient for the 5310 program in a large urbanized area.
All right, next question. Please discuss designated recipients across a state line for that state's portion of a large urbanized area funds.
This sounds like a multiple designation split, as we talked about earlier. What those designated recipients will have to do is they will have to come together and decide how they're going to administer the program in their area, and they will have to submit that in their management plans, notify the FTA region office, and notify the FTA region office how the apportioned funds are going to be split.
Okay. Next question: who is responsible for reporting the NTD data? And they ask if it's the designated recipient, subrecipient, the agency.
It'd be the designated recipient. we here at FTA are currently working with our Budget and Policy Office about NTD data reporting, how much information, what type of information is being reported, and even who might be reporting it. But as it stands right now, it would be the designated recipient. Sub-recipients would not be reporting to NTD.
Okay, great. Next question. Although grantees can combine fiscal year funding, are the regions or designated recipients able to make the decision to require separate sub-recipient applications for each fiscal year funding?
When the designated recipient submits their program or projects in their grant application, they have to identify which projects are being funded under which federal fiscal year, and it is the FTA region office that will make that split between the federal fiscal years as they reserve the funds. So there is a procedure for doing that to ensure that the appropriate funds are being expended, and there's not going to be over expenditure from one fiscal year's apportionment to the next fiscal year's apportionment.
Great. Next question. Please discuss performance measure reporting and asset condition performance reporting.
Those two areas are still under discussion with FTA, but as it stands right now, it appears that, as I said, the designated recipient would be doing the reporting. Sub-recipients would not be reporting. Asset management is something which we're discussing in our office, so that information will be coming out shortly.
Okay, great. We have one more question that we received in advance. Historically, agencies have requested 5310 PM funds based on the number of fleet vehicles that transport seniors and persons with disabilities. In the large urbanized area, many of the agencies believe that the entire appropriation can be used to fund PM on their total fleet as they transport seniors and persons with disabilities with their standard fleet. Hopefully, you will be able to help us understand the PM utilization.
Okay. Preventive maintenance, I'm pretty sure that's, when you say PM, that's what you're talking about, preventive maintenance there. But for the Section 5310 program, preventive maintenance is an eligible capital expense, but it would only be an eligible capital expense for your 5307 or 5311 providers under that under that 45% limitation bucket, if you will. For a traditional 5310 provider, preventive maintenance can be a capital expense under the 55%, so it is only for a nonprofit organization if they choose to use all of their funds for preventive maintenance for their vehicles, that would be permissible. But it is up to the designated recipient as they're looking at all of the projects that are being submitted for funding, that there is fair and equitable distribution. So it would probably not occur, but it is a possibility for the nonprofit organization to use 100% of the apportionment funds for preventive maintenance.
All right, well, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for sending in their questions in advance. Those were really great questions. And thank you so much, Mr. Williams, for that great information. That concludes the questions that we received in advance. So we are going to go ahead and end the session. I do want to let you know that we are going to send out an evaluation link for the session. We do take your feedback very seriously and use that to improve future events. So I will be sending an email to all of the registered participants after the session. So please take a moment to fill that out. Again, I want to thank Mr. Williams as well as our operator on the line that helped us out today, and thank you also for joining us. Do you have any closing comments?
Oh, I just want to thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me share this information. I know that there's still a lot of questions about MAP 21 Section 5310 program, even though, as I said, it's a 2-year bill and we're rapidly coming to an end of the second year. But I know there's still a lot of questions, a lot of angst out there about the program. So we here at FTA Rural and Targeted Programs are using every opportunity we can to provide information and provide guidance in order to assist people with their grant-making applications. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And just a reminder, keep your eyes open for the upcoming session. We're going to do this session again. So if you would like to, if you have remaining questions, you can ask them at the next session, or you can email those to us at projectaction@easterseals.com. Thank you again for your participation, and watch our website, projectaction.org, and your email for future Project Action events. But most importantly, we want to thank you for increasing and improving accessible transportation in your community. Have a great day. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect. For presenters, please hold the line.